Hello and morning everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar with Sophos today. So we're delighted to be joined by Matt Boddy from Sophos, who's going to be presenting the webinar. And the webinar today is all around the new Sophos Cloud Optix and how you can solve the toughest challenges in cloud security. We also have Luke Kiernan here from Bytes, who's going to briefly discuss our security business with you just before we pass over to Matt. But before I pass over to Luke, I was going to really quickly go through some housekeeping details with you all. So you are muted throughout the webinar today, but we'll hold a Q&A session at the end. So if you do have any questions you'd like to ask, just submit them in the questions box, which is just at the right-hand side of your screen. We're also recording the webinar today, so I'll send you all a link to the recording this afternoon or tomorrow morning. And there are a couple of questions at the end, so if you'd like any further information or if you'd like to request a call back from Bytes, please pop that in there and we'll get back to you. Okay, so I'm now going to pass you over to Luke.
Thanks, Amy. So before we kick things off with Matt from Sophos, I just wanted to quickly provide you an overview of our security offerings and kind of discuss at high level the value we saw around Sophos Optix. So we start from the left-hand side, and this runs over our accreditations and our cyber consultants accreditations. So our cyber consulting division basically focuses on security from everything outside of product, and that's headed up by our CISO, Steve Marshall. So we can offer services around penetration testing, and all of our engineers are CREST certified. And we can offer security of health checks, and we can do those based on ISS frameworks and benchmark you against companies in your vertical. We also do CISO as a service, incident response, and breach forensics. So there's a lot of value we can add around our cyber consulting division. And so if you are interested in any of those services, then do please reach out. And then from the right-hand side, this kind of discusses our vendor relationships, which we are we are top tier partner across our tier 1 vendors, which gives us commercial advantage and technical advantage as well. So we have a fair amount of vendor managed services, which includes Sophos, and we also have a SOC as a service, which if you're looking for a full security team to outsource, and we are able to do that for you. We have a number of service offerings, some of which are free of charge, like the Cloud Security Alignment Workshop, which Sophos Optix really does provide with value add around. And we also have some implementation and sort of health check services we can offer around certain technologies. But as Bytes are a huge Microsoft Azure and AWS partner, and obviously that continues to grow at a rapid pace, the common challenges we hear around security in those platforms is around visibility of assets, the ever-evolving compliance challenges, and securing DevOps practices. And this is why we saw extreme value in Sophos Optix, because it helps overcome these challenges. And we're delighted to be the first partner in the UK to showcase this solution to our customers. We've even started to deploy Sophos Optix in our own environment, and the ease of setup is great, along with the real-time network topology provides the real value badge, which you'll see from Matt shortly. So I'll pass over to Matt now, but if you do have any other questions, then please feel free to put those in the questions pod.
Thanks very much, Luke. And thanks, Amy.
Okay, 1 second, I'll just pass over to you, Matt.
Sure. Oops. Hi everyone, thank you very much for that, Luke and Amy. Yeah, so I'm Matt Boddy from Sophos, and we're going to be talking through Cloud Optix today. As Luke mentioned, it's a fantastic tool for gaining visibility. But before we do that, I think it's pertinent to be able to talk about why Cloud Optix is an important tool. So I go out to customers all the time for Sophos, on behalf of Sophos, and I speak to them about how their security estate is and what's happened in the estate of their security in the past. And I think learning from the history can really help us in securing our future. So when I speak to these customers, one thing that always rings true is if they've ever experienced a data breach, whether it's at that company or at a previous company, that data breach has been because some device is online without their knowledge, or a device with a weak username and password, poorly secured, is online without their knowledge. Sorry, perhaps saying all of the time is probably a bit of an exaggeration. Sometimes there are emails clicked as well, so maybe 50-50 between emails getting sent in and this type of having services internally that are exposed, which you're unaware of, is a huge issue. And as everyone starts to adopt the cloud, and I think the cloud is a really good thing, we're exposing more and more to the internet. So it's gaining visibility and control of that from a security perspective is extremely important, which is what we're all about with Cloud Optix, and what the new category created by Gartner, Cloud Security Posture Management, is all about. So to give you a bit of structure as to what we're going to be talking through today, we're going to be talking firstly about why the cloud is great, why it's really useful. And actually, I've stolen some slides directly from Amazon to be able to present to you, hopefully doing them some justice on why they have adopted, why they think people are adopting the cloud. Secondly, I want to talk to you about the quantity of threats that we face in the cloud on a daily basis. I've personally done quite a lot of research into this, and I've released a white paper available on the Sophos website all about the kind of quantity of threats that you are facing, the amount of login attempts you're getting to these externally exposed services on a daily basis. And then last of all, we're going to go through that cloud security posture management demo. So the demo of Cloud Optix and that will probably be the bulk of what we're talking about today. So to start with, let's just go through these stolen Amazon Web Services slides. And what they're saying is that things are changing. Time is changing. Every single business needs to become a digital business. And I think in the IT industry, we're quite aware of this. CIOs have now responsibility outside of traditional IT. So one of the things that they're saying is that essentially CIOs actually are involved in revenue generation of whatever company they're involved in. And if they're not at the moment, then they likely will be. So this is why it needs to be easy to digitally transform your business. And that's why Amazon Web Services has been adopted by many governments across the world. It's been adopted by many startups, which have been extremely successful in adopting the technology to fit their needs. For instance, Spotify, Dropbox, Pinterest, or LinkedIn are all users of Amazon Web Services. And the same will go for the likes of Azure and Google Cloud as well. This is just an example. And then there are long established businesses which have adopted this kind of this digital transformation in order to keep up with the times, and have been very successful in doing that. We've got organizations like Qantas that use Amazon Web Services to do their digital flight planning, for instance. And it means that they've been able to take the time of digital flight planning down from days to a number of hours. So, excuse me, what are the key points of this digital transformation? Why is it that Amazon Web Services, Azure, and Google Cloud is more effective than others? So it's because with Amazon and with Azure and with Google Cloud, it's really quick to deploy. You don't need a team of server gurus to go in, set up the server within a rack. You don't have to own that space within the rack. You don't have to have that within your premises. You don't have to then consider redundancy and where that's going to be, where else you need to place other servers within the world, and also the network redundancy as well. You don't have to consider what happens with that network pipe that's coming in and manage that relationship with a third party in order to bring that into your business. It's all managed externally. You're not worried about the housing of this project, which means the barrier to entry for a project, for a digital project, is very, very low. So if you're wanting to start a project with Amazon, or start a new app or another type of service, you can spin up some sort of platform as a service, and just get to work with actually running that code, meaning you don't need to employ a huge team of people that are looking after the infrastructure. You just need the engineers to get going with that technology, which is why startups have been extremely successful with this technology. There's a low cost to actually getting your project started, and it can elastically scale. So if suddenly your service is extremely successful, then the service can increase based on the demand. If your service is extremely unsuccessful, then there's been a low cost to this particular project because there's not been that much invested in it, and you're paying based on the amount of resource that you're using. It's globally accessible, and last of all, it is secure if you use the tools which are supplied to you. So there's been lots and lots of cases where people haven't used the tools which are supplied to you by the likes of Amazon, by the likes of Azure, and by the likes of Google Cloud. And let's just go through a few of those examples of where unfortunately there's been some of those tools that are available haven't been used. So for instance, we've got lots and lots of people's records which are being lost because of misconfiguration in things like S3 buckets, in other aspects of cloud technology. And this means that people like WWE, for instance, lost 3 million wrestling fans' details. The National Credit Federation leaked US citizen data throughout unsecured AWS buckets. It's unfortunate that actually you do still need a security expert to go over what the engineers are doing when they're quickly spinning up these services which you require for the project which is undergoing within the business. And this is where I wanted to do some research into how often, if you spin up a service within AWS, how often is that service receiving attacks? How often a breach is attempting to happen on that particular service? So the way in which I did this is I set up a bunch of basically login prompts across the world. So in 10 different countries, I spun up different SSH servers. Basically, they were Linux servers, the kind of things that you would spin up without thinking too much about it within AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud. And I did this, and I set up a honeypot basically. And what a honeypot is it's a method of trying to catch somebody. Basically, it's a method of trying to catch that attacker as they're trying to get into your environment. However, the way in which I was using a honeypot was to try and catch the attacker as they were getting into any environment, to understand the baseline of how often attackers are going after everything that's online. Because from the moment that your cloud service is active, it's just another service which is online. You're not necessarily being targeted. However, you are one of many services which that attacker can see, and that they will attempt to log into your service using what they believe to be your username and password. So where does the term honeypot come from? The word honeypot comes from actually kind of folklore that bears would go in and try and steal honey from a bee's hive. So they will go reach into a bee's hive and attempt to steal that honey. And in the process, they may well get stung. You may think this is a bit crazy, but I think we would have all heard of Winnie the Pooh, for instance, who is one of those bears that is always trying to steal honey and get stung in the process. Now, this is kind of relatable to the cyber criminal that is attempting to steal the honey from our honeypot, which is my SSH server, and they're going to get stung in the process of doing that. So how does this look? Well, I've spun up both low interaction and high interaction honeypots for this research. So let's just take a quick look at this low interaction honeypot. So this is what this looks like. Somebody will attempt to log in with a specific username and password, and as they type that in, essentially I'm just going to completely deny access to anybody, regardless of what username or password they attempt to use, and that will then be logged back end within my Elastic-Stack database. And that Elastic-Stack database is going to take those usernames and passwords, collate them all in one big database, so I can make some nice pie charts and graphs out of it to understand what usernames are they using, what passwords are they using most, where are they coming from, and what are they trying to do. Then we have a high interaction honeypot. Now this is slightly different because unlike the low interaction honeypot, where they may scrape the outside of my beehive but never get in, the high interaction honeypot allows them to get in and play around with the honey inside because they're allowed to actually log into this honeypot. They use the root username and a certain set of passwords, and they're going to be allowed to log in. At which point they can type in commands, and it runs just like a Linux system. Although this is completely this is not going to do anything at all. It's a virtual system which isn't actually Linux. It's just a list which is printing repetitively over and over again. These files don't exist which they're looking at, which then once again logs back into my database, and it shows me every single command that they've put in. So I've been able to understand what it is that they do in this environment when they do get into a device. So what did I see in terms of usernames and passwords that they logged in with? Root is the default username on a Linux box, and it's likely that a Linux box is going to be running SSH. So when somebody's going to try and break into the SSH service, they're going to be targeting that service. So for instance, they in my case, they're using the root username primarily, because that is on by default on all Linux devices, or most Linux devices, or on most Unix devices for that matter as well. So that takes for account about 5.2 million of my total logins, which is the large majority of them. We then see lots of other default usernames and passwords as well, things like Nagios, which is an SNMP monitor, which a lot of businesses would run in their environment. Nagios requires you to set up the Nagios username, meaning that actually that is a default username that you would have running in your business, at which point they just need to rely on the fact that you've not set a particularly strong password in that environment. If you're running Nagios within the cloud and you're gathering that telemetry data, that data from your switches, your routers in your environment, they're going to be trying to break into that so that they've got a foothold within your environment, because that gets them onto the box. And another thing that I noticed from this research is the password patterns which they attempt to use. 1QAZ2WSX is one of those such passwords. The next one is 1Q2W3E4R. Now these, as you can probably see from these keyboard patterns that we're displaying on the screen in front of you, are not much better than using QWERTY as your password, because they're such a close correlation of keys. They were very highly used a little while ago, which means that services which are still running and have this password on them are likely to be getting breached at this very second. I went on to Have I Been Pwned and typed in both of these passwords. Both of these passwords have been breached over 70,000 times. That's just in the reported data breaches that we know about. So a lot of people have used these passwords in the past, and we need to make sure that when somebody's logging onto a system, whether it's in the cloud or whether it's on our premise, that these types of passwords aren't existing, and that there's a second factor of authentication defending us against these. Now, back to the honeypot research on the cloud environment. When I started this up, I kind of wanted to gather information about where in the world is a bit of a safe haven. So is there somewhere that would allow me to kind of hide away on the internet, where I wouldn't get attacked as much as somewhere else? If I'm in the center of London, am I more likely to get attacked than if I'm in Ireland? So the research showed me that actually, no, this is not true in the slightest. Every single honeypot over just a 30-day period received hundreds of thousands of login attempts. Some slightly more than others. So the East Coast of the US, for instance, received almost 1 million login attempts. But that doesn't necessarily go to say that the East Coast of the US is going to be more secure than anywhere else. These statistics could change tomorrow. However, every single service received hundreds of thousands of login attempts, so there is no safe haven, which was my conclusion off of this essentially. And the time it took for the first login attempt to occur in the fastest instance, which actually was in South America, in Sao Paulo, in Brazil, was 52 seconds. So 52 seconds is the time that it took for the first login attempt to occur, which means that they didn't even have the time to understand the service was up. They're just going through a script of IP addresses online and attempting to break into that service by whatever means necessary. They find SSH available, they use a username and password that they've found for SSH. They find RDP accessible, they'll find the username and password field that they've got for RDP. Probably administrator for Windows systems, root for Linux systems. So they're targeting the service that they find, not necessarily the business as such. And they're doing it constantly, relentlessly. In total, we saw 5.4 million login attempts over that 30-day period, which kind of equates to 757 login attempts per hour per device, or 13 login attempts per minute per device. So if you think about it, if the fastest login attempts happens within 57 seconds, and then after a week or so of that service being established, you're going to receive 13 attempts per minute, you could set up a service with a relatively weak password thinking I'll change that after I've gone out and get my lunch, and it could already be owned by that time. Now, this is why Gartner has said that through 2022, at least 95% of cloud security failures will be the customer's fault. And this isn't just trying to point the finger at the customer, it's because of this, the cloud shared responsibility model. And this is primarily for Azure, I believe. But actually what this is showing us is that the cloud provider, whether that's Azure, AWS, or Google Cloud, is only responsible up to a certain point. If you're spinning up software as a service, for instance, their responsibility ends at endpoint protection. So they'll look after the hardware in your environment. They'll look after the data center, make sure nobody breaks in and gets physical access to that data center equipment, but they won't necessarily be looking after your data. So if you choose to spin up a service, if you choose, or your engineer happens to choose to spin up a database and forgets to encrypt that database, forgets to use a good username and password to authenticate to that database, what's to say that a hacker doesn't find it first, or a journalist and publishes that your business hasn't been particularly secure? And that's what this is all about. This is why they say that 95% of the cloud security failures will be the customer's fault. And in fact, I think that statistic probably 95%, I feel like that should probably be higher, because Amazon Web Services, the chances of their data centers and Azure's data centers being broken into, I think is probably slimmer than the chance of hosting data and not securing it properly. And that's why these two pieces of technologies have come out. Well, primarily one piece of this technology has come out, but it's to help you with cloud environments. Cloud access security brokers is something that allow you to gain visibility of the data that's traversing between your organization and the cloud. So you can understand if somebody's using something like Dropbox to store data when you want them to be using OneDrive, and then you can block that data from shifting up to that cloud service. But what we're focusing on at Sophos is something called Cloud Security Posture Management, which is giving you visibility of the cloud infrastructure that you've got. So that if you're using Amazon Web Services, Azure, or Google Cloud, for instance, it will give you visibility of the service which you've spun up within there. And it will allow you to see if there is data exposed to absolutely everyone. If you've got an unsecured database, you can then verify that with the DevOps team to understand whether they're doing that on purpose, and then you can verify whether that purpose of doing that is a valid one. So you can. This is a method of managing and securing your cloud estate, and this is something that the Gartner team are going to bringing out a Gartner Magic Quadrant for this year, and it's a very large focus of theirs. So let's go on to a bit of a demo now of what this looks like with Sophos. So here you can see my Cloud Optix dashboard. I've got a number of alerts at the top of this dashboard: 1 critical alert, 8 high alerts, 12 medium alerts, and 39 low alerts. And these are alerts that have been generated from the logs which I've got within Azure and within AWS. Now, you may be wondering how on earth I've connected this up with my Azure and AWS environments. If I go into my settings and click environments, you'll see that I have two environments set up with this, one in Azure, one in AWS. If I click add new environment, you'll see just how easy this is to get set up. In fact, if you wanted to run a trial of this straight away and get this set up within your Azure, AWS, or Google Cloud environment, then this would take you 20 minutes to half hour to get everything into this environment. It takes a few commands. So with AWS, it's probably a little bit more complicated than it is with Azure, because you've got to use the AWS CLI, which you just have to install on your machine. They've got some helpful documentation that explains how you do this in here. So you just select to copy these commands essentially, which will then download this .sh script to your machine, at which point that bash script will run in the background when you choose to run it with this second command within the AWS CLI, which will then integrate your AWS account with Cloud Optix. So you'll get set up and running within minutes, getting those alerts into Cloud Optix. Azure is a little bit easier because you've just got a few commands that you put into the PowerShell prompt within Azure. If you know Azure, then you'll know that there is a button within Azure that says Open Command Prompt. You can then select that command prompt is PowerShell. So all within your browser, you're able to copy and paste these commands and throw them into Azure. So this using flow logs, by the way, this does generate extra logs within Azure, and it will cost you more. So if you want to restrict the costs to your Azure account, you can turn this option off. I will show you in just a second of what data this generates so you understand what that cost is paying for essentially. So let's go back to my dashboard and have a look at the alerts which I've got in here. I've got one critical alert. I think we should probably start with that. And this is telling me that actually multi-factor authentication isn't turned on an account which has access to my Azure, my AWS infrastructure. If I now skip to my 8 high alerts, this is telling me a number of things. Those honeypots which I set up in 10 different countries, it's telling me that they are accessible from any IP address and they're accessible on port 22. So that month's worth of login attempts, that 5 million login attempts that I received on all 10 of these devices can be actioned and viewed in just a moment just by looking at these high alerts. The same goes for these 10 RDP services which I've got spun up on this that I can see within this same infrastructure. Now, it doesn't take a genius to guess what my next research paper is going to be on based on this information. So then you get other alerts as well, things telling you how to manage your posture within the cloud. For instance, I can click on my inventory, and this gives me an entire run through of my estate, telling me storage that I've got within AWS, which is currently public. It tells you hosts which are currently public within AWS. It tells you security groups which are currently open, so anybody can access them. It's not restricted down to a few. You can then analyze exactly what those are. The same goes for Azure. These are public. These storage accounts are public, and this network is currently open. The use of this then allows you to then demonstrate a topology. So the way in which we gather logs allows us to draw you an automatic topology of your cloud estate. So Luke mentioned this earlier when he introduced the call, that how useful this is. I think if I had this when I was a network engineer a number of years ago, that would have made my life so much simple. I could have got rid of Microsoft Visio for a little while, because this shows me every single region which I've spun up services within AWS. I can then click into that region and it automatically draws me this topology. Not only that, but it shows me the traffic which is flowing into and out of that particular environment. So if I click on this particular node, for instance, I can see that this is accessible on port 5145. And this is having outbound communication on ports 443, 80, and 9243. In fact, I can also see internal traffic which is flowing just within that particular region. So I know that actually other traffic from my other device is flowing to it on ports 5145. Now, if I explain to you what's happening in this environment, hopefully it will build story around that context. It will build to the context of what's going on. This is a log parsing server. So logs are being passed to this to then be passed up to my SIEM solution. So they're coming from other regions, which is why port 5145 is connecting inbound on this device to this device, and also within the same region, which is why this device is connecting in. This is one of my RDP honeypots. So this is accessible from the outside on port 3389, which is then passing that information back to this particular device, and that's passing it back up to my SIEM platform. These were the SSH servers. So actually, there's no traffic communicating at the moment because these devices are actually switched off. But if I select the security group, this will tell me what traffic is allowed to flow to these, because the security groups gives me the firewall details that is set up within Azure or AWS. So this gives me a fantastic amount of visibility. It doesn't just tell me the traffic which is currently flowing to that device. It tells me what ports are available and accessible on those devices. So let's have a look at this here. It tells me that port 22 is accessible from the internet, which is very true of the honeypot service which I had set up. And port 5045 is accessible, is allowed to be communicated outside of my environment, which is once again that logging service, the same as what I'm logging back here. So this gives me a fantastic amount of visibility within my environment, and that is not just for AWS. That also goes for Azure and Google Cloud as well. So if I wanted to go into my Azure or Google Cloud platform, I'd select Azure, and this would show me my estate. However, in Azure, I've got nothing spun up. I mentioned earlier that within the Environments tab, that may tell you that when I was setting up an environment for Azure, that may cost you more depending on the flow logs if you send those flow logs back to Cloud Optix. The flow logs help with that flow of traffic. So if we go into my AWS account, for instance, this will be very similar for AWS and Azure. I can, for instance, this traffic which I'm seeing, so the traffic that's flowing inbound and outbound to these devices, that is gathered via the flow log on Azure. It costs you extra on Azure, and it doesn't cost you extra on AWS. So it's worth knowing where those extra costs could be incurred. Now, the next thing that I'm going to show you is the compliance policies that are available within this platform as well. So we're able to judge how compliant our cloud estate is based on a set of rules that we have pre-set up. So for instance, I can scroll down here and we've got a rule set like GDPR, for instance, where I can see that we've currently failed on 36 out of those 95 rules. So I can gain visibility of this straight away, or I can download a PDF which would tell me exactly what it is we're failing on, so I can bring this and present this to the DevOps team so that they understand what exactly is going wrong. So encryption of data is currently not happening on quite a few volumes. But these policies don't just stop at GDPR policy. So they also go to, let's go back into my compliance. They also go to things like PCI DSS and ISO 27001. So if I go into my PCI DSS compliance, for instance, I can see that 19 out of those 55 policies have failed. Once again, I can download a PDF to present this to my DevOps team to tell them what it is they need to do in order to fix this. So this is saying that ensure CloudTrail logs are encrypted at rest. So those CloudTrail logs, which I'm gathering to understand what data is passing between devices, should be encrypted. Otherwise, we may be giving out sensitive data to it elsewhere. So in order, if I make that a pass, then I'm doing another step further towards PCI compliance within my cloud environment. So this has been quite a brief overview of what cloud security posture management is, how we do it here at Sophos with Cloud Optix, and how you can gain really good, very quick visibility of your cloud estate. And this will update every half an hour to give you a near to real-time view of what is happening in that cloud estate. If there's any questions, if I could ask you to just throw them in the questions in the Q&A section on the right-hand side of the GoTo meeting, then I'll be happy to answer those.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks.
Yes, if you do have any questions, there is the questions box, which is on the control panel, just at the right-hand side of your screen. If you pop them in there, I'll read those out for Matt. Or if we do have our email address on the screen there as well, if you prefer to submit any outside of the webinar today. I'll just wait a couple of minutes to see if any come through.
Sure.
So one question has come through. Do you have any plans to integrate with VMware private cloud or public hosted?
So unfortunately, I'm not allowed to discuss the roadmap of Optix without an NDA, but there are plans to move forward and integrate new technologies into Cloud Optix. One of our first priorities is to integrate it fully into the Sophos Central platform. So if you are using existing Sophos products like managing the Sophos endpoint or servers, your server platforms through our central management platform, then the aim is to get it into that same place so you can manage everything from one portal, one single pane of glass for Sophos products. But at the moment, as it stands, I can't discuss exactly what that roadmap is for introducing new technology to the Cloud Optix platform.
Okay, and there's another question.
Sure.
Does this relate to all CAB solutions, or is this totally separate product, not connected to CASB type solutions?
Yeah, so this and CASB are very different solutions. Amy, is there any chance I can share my screen again for just a second?
Yeah, sure, 1 second.
Wonderful, thank you. So, so this screen here that I was displaying earlier, showing you the difference. What I was trying to do, I think, but I may have confused you a little bit, as I was trying to show you the difference between CASB and Cloud Security Posture Management. Both of these are coming out in their own right as separate Gartner Magic Quadrants this year. Or at least Gartner have stated that is their aim. But CASB is very much a completely separate solution to this Cloud Security Posture Management. So this monitoring of what's going on within Azure, within AWS, within Google Cloud, and the likes is a separate item to CASB, which is kind of like a traffic monitor platform where you monitor your traffic and what is going to the cloud. Hopefully that answers the question.
He said yes, thank you, it has. Okay, we'll just wait a couple more minutes, see if any more come through.
It's probably worth mentioning just while we wait for those to come through.
Sorry.
I was just going to say around the licensing for Cloud Optix. So a single license of Cloud Optix can cover 3 cloud environments and up to 100 assets. If you did need more assets added on top, you'd just effectively buy another license of Cloud Optix.
That's a good point. So Optix, one question that I had from a customer I was speaking to this about the other day was just, can you have more than one AWS, more than one Azure environment all within this console? And you absolutely can. So you can add as many environments as you like into here. Obviously, the licensing may differ depending on how many environments you add. But you just add the environment and you can actually filter out to only view a specific environment at that moment in time. So if I just wanted to view my Azure environment, I could do so. If I just wanted to view AWS, I could also do so. Or if I wanted to view a specific AWS cloud environment, if I suddenly discover that there's a rogue team that have just gone and created their own rogue AWS environment, as soon as I've integrated with it, I could go down, drill down and view just that AWS environment from here.
Thanks, guys. And we have another question here that says, does the solution integrate with SIEM solutions? And if so, which ones?
That's a good question again. So if I go through to my settings and my integrations, you'll be able to see that we can integrate with things like Splunk, with Slack, and with Jira in order to pass any data that's coming through from this to your SIEM platform. Hopefully that answers the question you've got there.
Sorry, so the same, so this is Stuart again. He said, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right, IBM QRadar. Is that right? It's spelled QRADAR?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct, Amy, yeah. That's another theme solution. Is Matt on the line still?
Oh, apologies. Sorry, I was on mute then and I didn't realise. Yeah. So, I'm going to have to take that one away, I'm afraid, and get back to you. But I will get back to you on that. If I think I'll get your details after this call based on what you've put into the to register for the webinar. And once I've done that, I can respond to that question offline.
Yeah, sure. We'll take that offline for you and get yourself and Matt in touch. Okay, brilliant. So I think from the looks of things, that's all the questions we have today. Let me have a quick look. So thank you everyone for joining the webinar today and taking the time out of your busy days. And thank you so much, Matt, for presenting, and also Luke as well. So as mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, I'll send you all a link either this afternoon or tomorrow morning with an email with a link to the slides and the recording for you all to view. And if you do have any questions, further questions, our email address is on the screen. And if you do want any further information, just pop that in the feedback form at the end and we'll get back to you. Okay, so thanks everyone again for joining and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Cheers.